It's the looking away that I can't forget. That's the part that stays with me. Not what my mother did, not even the feeling it gave me. It was the way everyone else in the room would suddenly find something else to look at. The way they all participated in the silence. And that silence made me feel like I was the one who was wrong. For years, it made me believe I was imagining things. My name is Laura. I'm 41 now. I've been married to Ryan for 12 years. He's a good man, or at least I always thought he was. He's calm, polite. He never causes a scene. My family always liked him for that. I was always close to my parents, very close. My dad was my rock, the center of our family. When he passed away 2 years ago, everything shifted. My mother, Evelyn, was suddenly a widow at 67. Before that, she was always so proper, reserved. You knew where you stood with her. Everything was in its place. After my dad was gone, things started to change, but only when Ryan was around. It started small, so small you could brush it off. And I did. For a long time, I did. We'd be at her house for Sunday dinner, just like we always were. My sister, Sarah, and her family would be there too. Everything would feel normal. My mother would be quiet, a little sad, which we all understood. Then Ryan would walk in, and something in her would just light up. It wasn't the normal happy to see you kind of way. It was different. I felt it in my gut right from the first time. A little flicker of wrongness. She'd stand up a little straighter. Her voice would get a little higher. She'd greet him in a way she didn't greet anyone else. Not me, not my sister, not her own son-in-law. The first time, she touched his arm when he came through the door. Her hand just rested there for a few seconds too long. I saw it. I'm sure I saw it, but Ryan just gave a polite smile. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. He was just neutral. I looked over at my sister, but she was busy taking her kids' coats off. She didn't notice, or she acted like she didn't. So I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself she was just lonely, grieving, reaching for a connection. It was easier to believe that. A few weeks later, we were all at my house for a barbecue. My mom was helping me in the kitchen. Again, she was her usual self. Quiet, a little distant. Ryan came in from the backyard to grab something from the fridge. The moment he entered the room, her whole posture changed. She turned her body towards him. She had a dish towel in her hand, and she started sort of playfully snapping it in his direction. She made a joke, something about him being the man of the house now. It wasn't funny. It felt weird. Charged. Ryan just gave a little non-committal laugh and got what he needed from the fridge. He left the room quickly. I just stood there. My hands stopped what they were doing. I looked at my mother. She was smiling. A kind of smile I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. It wasn't a happy smile. It was knowing. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I tried to say something, to keep it light. I made a comment about her being in a silly mood. She just laughed it off. She told me not to be so serious. She made it seem like I was the one creating this strange atmosphere. The pattern started to become undeniable, at least to me. Every family gathering, it was the same. If Ryan was in a conversation, my mother would find a way to join it. She'd stand a little closer to him than to anyone else. She'd direct all her questions to him. She'd laugh louder at his jokes than anyone else's. It was an intense focus, an energy that was aimed only at him. And the rest of my family seemed completely blind to it. I remember one time at Thanksgiving, we were all sitting in the living room after dinner. My mother started telling a story about something my father used to do. It was a sweet story, but halfway through, she turned to Ryan. She looked right at him. She put her hand on his knee. She finished the story while looking only at him, as if they were the only two people in the room. Her hand was still on his knee. I froze. I could feel my own hands clenching in my lap. I looked around the room. My sister was looking at her phone. Her husband was half asleep in his chair. My aunt was talking to my cousin. Nobody was watching. Nobody seemed to care. The touch lingered. Ryan didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just sat there, listening politely, with my mother's hand on his leg. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she finally took her hand away. She sighed as if she'd just shared a deeply intimate moment. I felt sick. I got up and went to the kitchen. I just needed to get out of that room. My sister followed me in a few minutes later. I thought, finally, she must have seen it. She must have felt how wrong that was. She came over to the sink where I was standing. She asked if I was okay. I just looked at her. I asked her if she didn't think that was strange, out there with Mom and Ryan. She got a guarded look on her face, a look I would come to know very well. She told me Mom is just lonely, that she probably sees Dad and Ryan. She said I was overthinking it, that it was harmless. That was the word she used, but it didn't feel harmless. It felt like a violation. It felt like a secret I was being forced to keep. And in that moment, I realized my sister wasn't blind to it. She saw it. She just chose not to. That was the first time I understood that the problem wasn't just my mother's behavior. It was the silence from everyone else, the collective agreement to pretend. I started to feel incredibly alone, even in a room full of family. I tried to talk to Ryan about it that night on the drive home. I was careful with my words. I didn't want to sound accusatory. I just asked him if he ever felt uncomfortable around my mom. He kept his eyes on the road. He was quiet for a long time. Then he just said she was going through a lot. He said we needed to be patient with her. He never actually answered my question. He deflected. Just like my sister. Just like my mother. I was sitting in the passenger seat next to my own husband, and I had never felt more distant from him. It was like there was a wall between us. A wall made of all the things he wasn't saying. I realized he noticed it too. Of course he did. He was the one she was touching. He was the one she was staring at. He just wasn't going to admit it. He wasn't going to back me up. He was choosing to pretend to. That night, I felt a fundamental shift. The problem wasn't just in my family's living room anymore. It was in my car. It was in my marriage. It was everywhere. After that, I started to watch everyone more closely. I became an observer in my own life. I stopped trying to convince myself I was wrong. I started gathering evidence, even if only for myself. Christmas came a month later. We were all at my sister's house. My mother brought gifts for everyone. When she handed Ryan his, she held onto it for an extra moment. She leaned in close to him, supposedly to tell him something about the gift, but it was more like a whisper. Her hand brushed against his chest. It was a tiny moment, a blink and you miss it kind of thing, but I wasn't blinking anymore. I was watching. I saw the flicker of something in Ryan's eyes, a brief flash of annoyance or discomfort. It was there and then it was gone. He replaced it with that same placid, polite smile. I looked at my sister, Sarah. She was handing a gift to one of her kids. Her back was turned to the whole interaction. Convenient. Later that day, I saw my mom corner Ryan in the hallway. She was talking to him in a low, intense voice. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language was all wrong. She was standing too close. She was leaning into his space. He was standing perfectly still, his back almost against the wall. He looked trapped. I started to walk toward them. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to interrupt it. As soon as my mother saw me approaching, she stepped back. Her whole demeanor changed in an instant. She smiled at me, a bright, false smile. She made a casual comment about the weather and then walked away as if nothing had happened. Ryan pushed himself off the wall. He wouldn't look at me. He just muttered something about needing to check the score of the game and walked right past me. He was escaping. From her and from me. I stood alone in the hallway. The sound of my family laughing and talking came from the living room. It felt like it was a million miles away. I was starting to feel like a ghost in my own family. The only one who could see the rot that was spreading underneath everything. It got worse. The little things started to add up, becoming a mountain of unspoken truths. My mom started calling Ryan, not our house phone, his cell phone. At first, it was for practical reasons. A question about her car or her computer. Things my dad would have handled. Ryan would always help her. He was always patient. But then the reasons became flimsier. She'd call to tell him about a show she watched. Or a funny thing a neighbor said. Things you'd tell a friend. Or a daughter. She wasn't calling me with these stories. She was calling my husband. One evening, his phone rang while we were making dinner. He answered it. His face was neutral, but I could tell by the tone of his voice. He kept his answers short. Yes. Okay. I'll take a look. When he hung up, he put the phone down and didn't say anything. I asked who it was. He hesitated for a second. Then he said it was my mom. She had a question about her smoke detector. I just stared at him. I knew he was telling the truth, but not the whole truth. It wasn't just about the smoke detector. It was about the pattern, the constant escalating need for his attention. I told him that she seemed to be relying on him a lot. He just shrugged. He said it was no big deal. He was happy to help. He was shutting me down. He was making it clear that this was not a topic for discussion. He was protecting her, or protecting himself, or just protecting the peace. But the peace was a lie, and his refusal to talk about it was making me feel like I was the enemy. The breaking point for me wasn't one big dramatic event. It was a small thing, a stupid, trivial thing. It was my birthday. We were at a restaurant. Me, Ryan, my mom, and my sister's family. I was sitting between my mom and Ryan. Throughout the dinner, she barely spoke to me. All of her energy, all of her focus was on him. She asked him about his work. She laughed at his stories. She found reason to touch his arm, his shoulder. I just sat there, trying to eat. My food had no taste. I felt invisible. It was my birthday, and I was completely, utterly invisible. Then it was time to cut the cake. The waiter brought it over. Everyone sang. I blew out the candles. And then my mom did something. She reached over past me. She took a little bit of frosting on her finger, and she playfully dabbed it on Ryan's nose. She laughed, a high, girlish laugh. The whole table went quiet for a second. Ryan's face froze, just for a split second. The polite mask slipped. I saw pure, unadulterated annoyance. He looked angry, then just as quickly it was gone. He wiped the frosting off his nose with a napkin and forced a tight smile. I looked at my sister. She was staring down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by her fork. Her husband was clearing his throat, looking at the ceiling. Nobody said a word. The moment passed, the conversation started up again, forced and brittle. But I couldn't move. It wasn't about the frosting. It was about the audacity, the public nature of it, the way she had to mark her territory, even on my birthday. And it was about the silence, the deafening, crushing silence from everyone. In that moment, I realized that I was completely and utterly alone in this. My husband would not protect me. My sister would not defend me. They were all willing to sacrifice my comfort, my sanity, for the sake of avoiding a confrontation with my mother. I felt something inside me just break. I stood up from the table. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my purse. I walked out of the restaurant. No one followed me. I took a cab home. I sat in my dark living room for hours. I didn't turn on any lights. I just replayed that moment at the table over and over again in my head. The frosting, Ryan's frozen face, my sister staring at her plate. It was all so clear. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. This was real. And it was ugly. Ryan came home a couple of hours later. He found me sitting there in the dark. He didn't turn on the light. He just stood in the doorway. He asked if I was okay. His voice was tired. I didn't answer. He sighed. He said I had embarrassed him, that I had upset my mother. He told me I was making a big deal out of nothing, that she was just being playful. Nothing. He called it nothing. That's when I knew, really knew. It wasn't just that he was pretending not to see it. He was actively siding against me to maintain the pretense. His comfort was more important than my reality. The family's fragile peace was more important than my pain. I finally spoke. I told him that I was done. I was done pretending. I was done being the only one who had to carry the weight of this wrongness. I told him I couldn't be in a room with her anymore, not like this. I expected him to argue, to get angry. But he just stood there. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he just said, okay. And he went upstairs to bed, as if I had just told him we were out of milk. That was it. That was the conversation that ended my marriage, even though we stayed in the same house for another year. The silence had finally won. It had consumed everything. After that night, I stopped going to family gatherings if my mother was there. I made excuses. I was sick. I had to work. At first, my sister would call and try to guilt me into coming. She'd tell me I was hurting Mom's feelings. I just told her I couldn't do it. After a while, she stopped calling. Ryan still went. He would go to Sunday dinners, to holidays. He would tell me it was important to keep the peace. He was choosing them. Over and over again, he was choosing them. He would come home from these events and act as if everything was normal. He'd tell me who was there and what they ate. He never mentioned my mother. He never told me if her behavior continued. And I never asked. We lived like roommates. We were polite. We were distant. The space between us was filled with all the things we couldn't say. I felt like I was grieving. I was grieving the family I thought I had, the mother I thought I knew, the husband I thought would have my back. The isolation was complete. I had been surgically removed from my own life, all because I was the only one willing to see what was right in front of us. The truth, when it finally came out, wasn't from a dramatic confession. It came from a box of old letters. About a year after the restaurant incident, I decided I had to leave. I couldn't live in that silent house with Ryan anymore. I started packing my things. I went into the attic to get some old boxes. In the back, tucked away, was a box of my father's things. Things my mom had given me after he died, telling me she couldn't bear to look at them. I sat down and opened it. It was mostly old papers, photos, his army medals. At the very bottom was a bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon. They were from my mother to my father. From before they were married. I knew I shouldn't read them. It felt like a violation, but something compelled me. I needed to understand the woman she was before all of this, so I read them. The first few were sweet, normal love letters, but then the tone started to change. She wrote about her fears, her insecurities. She wrote about her desperate need for attention, for validation. She wrote about a man she had been involved with before she met my dad, an older married man. She described how she pursued him, how she loved the thrill of it, the secret, the power she felt in being the one he wanted, even if it was wrong. She wrote about how crushed she was when he ended it to stay with his wife. And then, in a letter from just a few weeks before her wedding to my dad, she wrote something that made my blood run cold. She wrote that she knew my dad was a safe choice, that he was good and kind and would never leave her. But she also wrote that she would always miss the excitement of the forbidden. I sat there in the dusty attic with these letters in my hand, and I understood. It wasn't about Ryan. Not really. It was never about him. He was just a stand-in. He was this safe, unavailable man in her life now that my father was gone. He was married to her daughter, which made him forbidden. It was a role he was forced into. She wasn't trying to steal my husband. She was replaying a pattern, a sick, selfish pattern from her youth. She was feeding her own ego, her own desperate need for a secret thrill. And the reason my family pretended not to see it? My sister, my aunts, maybe even my dad. They had been managing her behavior their whole lives. They knew about this side of her, this fragile, attention-seeking, boundary-crossing side. Their silence wasn't a new thing. It was a lifelong coping mechanism. Don't upset Mom. Just ignore her. It's easier this way. I had just never been the target before. And Ryan, he wasn't choosing them over me. He was just doing what he always does, avoiding conflict, taking the path of least resistance. It was easier for him to absorb the discomfort and pretend it wasn't happening than it was to stand with me and face the storm. His silence wasn't malicious. It was just weak. Finding those letters didn't fix anything, but it gave me my sanity back. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't oversensitive. I was the only one who hadn't been conditioned to look away. I filed for divorce a week later. Ryan didn't fight it. I think, in his own quiet way, he was relieved. The day I moved out, he helped me carry boxes to my car. We didn't talk much. When we were done, he just stood on the porch. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in over a year. He told me he was sorry. It was the one and only time he ever acknowledged it. I just nodded. It was too late for apologies. The damage was done. I live in a small apartment now. It's quiet. I haven't spoken to my mother since I left Ryan. I sent her a letter. I told her I knew. I didn't explain how. I just said I knew what she was doing, and I wouldn't be a part of it. She never replied. My sister, Sarah, calls me sometimes on holidays, birthdays. Her voice is always strained. We talk about the weather, her kids. We don't talk about anything that matters. She has never once asked me why I left my husband. She has never once mentioned my mother. She is still pretending. The silence is her shield. I realize now that my family wasn't a close, harmonious unit. It was a group of people held together by a shared secret, a collective agreement to enable one person's dysfunction. My father's death didn't change my mother. It just removed her primary handler, and I was the one who refused to take his place. It's been 2 years. I'm learning to live with the quiet, not the suffocating silence of denial, but a real, peaceful quiet. I've learned that ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. It just isolates the person who sees it. When everyone looks away, the truth doesn't disappear. It just becomes one person's burden to carry. I'm not carrying it for them anymore. I chose to see, and that choice cost me my family. but it gave me back myself. Now I know it was never my fault. I don't have to wait for an answer anymore. I chose myself. It was the little things at first, the things you could explain away. After the funeral, when the house was finally empty of sympathetic neighbors and their casseroles, my mother started her campaign of small invasions. She would call Ryan's cell phone instead of the landline, claiming she didn't want to bother me if I was busy. She'd ask for his help with things my dad had always handled: a flickering light bulb, a stubborn jar lid, the settings on her new television. Harmless things. I told myself it was harmless. That was the word I used, harmless. But the wrongness of it began to gather, like dust in an unused room. It settled on everything. The first time I couldn't ignore it, the first time this sickness coiled in my stomach and refused to be dismissed, was a Sunday dinner about 2 months after Dad was gone. Sunday dinners had been his thing. My dad at the head of the table, carving a roast, my mother bustling around him. Now the head of the table was empty, a ghost in a chair. The silence where his voice should have been was a physical presence. My sister Sarah was there, scrolling through her phone as usual. My mother Evelyn had made Dad's favorite pot roast, and the air was thick with the smell of memory and beef. Ryan was sitting next to me, a warm, solid presence I had always leaned on. My rock, I used to call him. After my dad, he was supposed to be my rock. My mother was telling a story about a neighbor. Her voice was animated, her hands gesturing. She was sitting across from Ryan, and her focus was entirely on him. She hadn't looked at me or Sarah for a full 5 minutes. I watched her, a familiar tightness in my chest. She laughed, a high, girlish sound I hadn't heard since before my father's illness, and reached across the table. She was going to touch his hand, I thought. Just a playful pat. But she didn't. Instead, her fingers went to his wine glass. It was nearly empty. "Oh, Ryan, you're dry," she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Let me fix that for you." She stood up, but instead of taking his glass to the kitchen counter where the bottle of Merlot was, she picked up the bottle and brought it to the table. She leaned over, her body angled directly toward him. Her arm brushed his shoulder as she poured. It wasn't a quick, accidental contact. It was a slow, pressing weight. I saw the fabric of his shirt dimple under the pressure of her arm. He didn't move. He didn't even seem to breathe. She poured the wine, her head bent low, her hair nearly grazing his cheek. The moment stretched, thin and humming, charged with something I couldn't name but felt in my bones. It felt private, intimate. It felt wrong. I looked at my sister. Sarah's eyes had been on them. I saw it. A flicker of something, annoyance, discomfort, before her gaze snapped down to her plate. She picked up her fork and meticulously nudged a stray pea into her mashed potatoes. She pushed it back and forth, a tiny, pointless war on her plate. It was the looking away that I couldn't forget. It was an action, a choice. She had seen it and chosen to unsee it. I looked back at Ryan. My mother was straightening up now, placing the bottle on the table with a soft click. Ryan finally took a breath. He gave her a small, tight smile, the polite smile, the neutral smile, the one that meant he was uncomfortable, but would rather die than show it. "Thanks, Evelyn," he said. His voice was perfectly level. Nobody said a word about it. The silence rushed back in, heavier this time. My mother sat down, a faint, satisfied blush on her cheeks. She finally looked at me, her eyes bright and empty. "Laura, honey, you're not eating." I put my fork down. My appetite was gone, replaced by a cold knot of dread. The car ride home was quiet. The streetlight slid across the windshield, painting stripes of orange and black over Ryan's face. His jaw was set. He was staring straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. He was building the wall made of all the things he wasn't saying. I had to try. I had to know if I was the only one. "That was weird tonight," I said, keeping my voice as light as I could manage. It came out thin and brittle. He didn't look at me. "My mom," I said, the way she was. "With you." He was quiet for a long moment. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "She's grieving, Laura." The excuse. The perfect, unimpeachable excuse that covered everything. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for bad behavior. And my mother was playing it for all it was worth. "I know she's grieving," I said, my voice gaining an edge I didn't want. But that wasn't grief. That was something else. The wine, the way she was leaning on you, you had to have felt it. Felt what? He asked, his tone shifting. He was on the defensive now. She poured me some wine. We should be trying to support her right now, not analyzing her every move. I'm not analyzing, I'm seeing, I insisted, my hands twisting in my lap. Ryan, please, just tell me you saw it. It was uncomfortable. It was weird. He finally glanced at me, his face hard in the intermittent light. What do you want me to say, Laura? That your mom, who just lost her husband of 45 years, is hitting on me. Does that sound sane to you? She's lonely. She's leaning on family, on us. It's not a big deal unless you make it one. He turned his attention back to the road. The wall was up now, solid and impenetrable. I was on one side and he was on the other. He had made his choice. He was with Sarah, on the side of pretending. It was easier there. I felt a wave of dizziness. He was making me the problem. My perception was the problem. My noticing was the problem. If I had just looked away, like Sarah, everything would be fine. If I had just pretended not to see her arm pressing into his shoulder, pretended not to feel the charged air, the quiet would have been peaceful instead of suffocating. You're reading too much into it. She's just being friendly. Don't make things awkward. The phrases began to circle in my head, a chorus of dismissal I knew I would hear again and again. They were Ryan's weapons, his tools for keeping the peace. His peace, not mine. When we got home, the silence followed us inside. It was a thick, cloying thing. Ryan went straight into the living room and turned on the TV. The canned laughter of a sitcom filled the space where our conversation should have been. Convenient. I stood in the hallway, my coat still on, listening to the fake joy from the television. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I had walked into the wrong house, the wrong life. This man on the couch, my husband, had just witnessed the same event I had. We had shared the same space, breathed the same air, but had emerged with two completely different realities. In his, a grieving mother-in-law had been affectionate. In mine, a woman had crossed a line, and her own daughter had been made to feel like a fool for seeing it. I realized then that this wasn't just about my mother. It was about him, too, about his refusal to stand with me. His politeness wasn't a virtue, it was a shield. It protected him from conflict, from messiness, from taking a side. And in a situation like this, not taking a side was taking a side. He had sided with the silence. I walked upstairs and into our bedroom. I looked at our wedding photo on the nightstand. Two smiling people who thought they knew each other, who thought they saw the world the same way. I felt a pang of grief for them, for us. It was a different kind of grief than the one for my father. It was this sickening hollow grief for something you thought was solid, but was turning out to be sand. I was alone. It was the first time I had felt truly, utterly alone since my father died. I was a ghost in my own family, witnessing a truth no one else would admit was there. The wrongness was real. I knew it was, but I was the only one willing to look. Of course, since you have not provided the text to be expanded, I will create a short, evocative piece of original text and then expand it as requested to approximately 1,500 words, focusing on adding rich detail, description, and a strong narrative voice in American English. The old key turned in the lock with a rusty groan. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the hallway. The room smelled of old paper and time itself. In the center, under a white sheet, was a large square object. I pulled the sheet away, revealing an old writing desk. There's expanded text. The key was a thing of substance, a heavy, skeletal piece of iron that felt cold and foreign in my palm. It wasn't like the flimsy, mass-produced keys of the modern world. This one had a dense, ornate head shaped into a trefoil knot and a long, solid shaft ending in a complex, almost floral bit. I'd found it in a small, lacquered box at the bottom of my grandfather's sea chest, tucked away with his naval discharge papers and a single, faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. A small, yellowed tag was tied to it with a brittle piece of string, labeled in his spidery cursive, "The Attic Study," a room I never knew existed. Now, standing before the unassuming door at the far end of the upstairs hallway, a door I had passed thousands of times and dismissed as a shallow linen closet, the key felt like a tangible piece of a forgotten story. I pushed it into the keyhole, a dark slit in a tarnished brass plate. It slid in with a gritty scrape, meeting resistance almost immediately. For a moment, I was sure it was the wrong key, another dead end in this house. of quiet secrets. But I gave it a firm, determined twist. The response was not a clean click, but a deep, guttural groan that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the house. It was the sound of metal that hadn't moved in decades, a rusty, protracted complaint against the intrusion. The sound vibrated up my arm, a shuddering protest from the past. With a final, jarring clunk, the mechanism surrendered. The doorknob, a simple crystal orb clouded with age, turned loosely in my hand. I took a breath, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs, and pushed the door inward. It opened onto a wall of darkness, a darkness so absolute and profound it felt solid. The only illumination was this single, sharp blade of light cast from the hallway behind me, cutting a bright trapezoid onto the dusty floorboards. This light was an intruder here, and the darkness seemed to resent it, pressing in from all sides. Within that solitary beam, an entire universe came to life. Dust motes disturbed by the door's movement launched into a silent, chaotic ballet. They were not mere specks. They were a swirling, weightless galaxy of microscopic debris, fibers from forgotten fabrics, flakes of dried paint, particles of human skin shed by people long gone. They spun and eddied in the golden light, a shimmering, ethereal blizzard suspended in time. As my eyes began to adjust, I stepped across the threshold, and the air that greeted me was a physical presence. It was thick, cool, and utterly stagnant, carrying an aroma so complex it was almost overwhelming. The primary scent was of old paper, not the musty, mildewed smell of a damp basement, but the dry, almost sweet fragrance of well-kept, aging books. It was the scent of lignin breaking down, releasing a subtle hint of vanilla and almond. Woven through it was the sharp, acidic tang of decaying newsprint and the earthy aroma of leather bindings slowly turning brittle. Beneath it all was a foundational scent of old wood, the faint resinous perfume of pine floorboards, and the deeper, richer note of polished hardwood. It was the smell of stillness, of captured moments, of abandonment. My grandfather had called it the attic study, but it smelled simply of time itself, condensed and bottled in this forgotten space. The room was not large, perhaps 12 feet square, with a steeply sloped ceiling that followed the roofline of the old Victorian house. The walls were lined with built-in bookshelves, their dark wood barely visible behind a ghostly film of dust. Most of the shelves were still packed with books, their spines forming a mosaic of faded golds, deep reds, and somber browns. My attention, however, was immediately drawn to the object in the center of the room. It was the focal point, the heart of this sealed chamber, made all the more mysterious by the large, formless white sheet draped over it. The sheet, likely once a crisp linen dust cover, had yellowed with age and was mapped with faint sepia-toned water stains, where the roof might have leaked at some point in the distant past. It sagged and folded, hinting at the sharp geometric angles of the object it concealed, creating a ghostly, anthropomorphic silhouette in the gloom. It looked like a sleeping giant, a monument to a purpose long since concluded. I moved toward it slowly, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the groaning floorboards. The air seemed to grow heavier, more expectant. I reached out a tentative hand, my fingers hesitating just inches from the fabric. The texture was rougher than I expected, a coarse, heavy canvas that felt gritty under my fingertips. A fresh cloud of dust billowed up from the simple contact, catching the light and creating a new flurry in the air. Who had covered this, and why? Was it to protect it from the elements, or to hide it away to put a final, definitive end to its use? My curiosity finally overwhelmed my sense of trespassing. Grasping a corner of the heavy sheet, I pulled. The fabric resisted for a second, caught on a sharp corner, then slid free with a soft, sighing hiss. It was heavier than I'd anticipated, and it slithered to the floor in a heap, releasing a final great puff of dust that made me cough. And then I saw it. It was an old writing desk, but that simple description felt wholly inadequate, like calling a cathedral a big church. This was a magnificent mahogany secretary desk, its wood glowing with a deep, rich, reddish-brown luster, even under the thick coat of dust. It was a piece of masterful craftsmanship, likely from the late 19th century. The top half was a bookcase with 2 glass-pane doors, behind which I could see the leather-bound spines of more books. Below that was the main event, a slanted lid, the writing surface, which was closed, hiding whatever secrets lay within its cubbyholes and drawers. I ran my hand over the slanted surface, my fingers leaving clean trails in the gray dust. The wood was smooth as silk beneath the grime. The desk stood on 4 elegantly carved cabriole legs that terminated in detailed ball and claw feet, each talon gripping a wooden sphere with fierce permanence. The brass hardware, the keyhole escutcheon on the lid, the ornate batwing drawer poles below, was tarnished to a dark greenish black, but the quality was unmistakable. This was not just furniture, it was a partner. I could almost picture someone sitting here, the slanted lid folded down to create a flat writing surface, its original leather inlay now cracked and faded. I imagined the scratch of a fountain pen on heavy paper, the soft glow of an oil lamp illuminating a page late into the night. Ink stains, like dark little ghosts, were splattered near the right side of the desk, permanent marks of creative fervor, or perhaps frustrated scribbling. A long, thin scratch marred the surface near the top, a wound from a carelessly placed letter opener, or a moment of passion. Each flaw was a word, each stain a sentence, in the desk's long, silent story. My eyes roamed over its features, discovering new details at every turn. To the left and right of the main cabinet were 2 thin vertical columns, which I initially took for mere decoration. On a whim, I pressed a small, almost invisible knot in the carved wood of the right-hand column. With a soft click, a section of the column popped forward, revealing a set of 3 tiny hidden drawers, each no bigger than a matchbox. My breath caught in my throat. This desk was built for secrets. It was more than an object, it was a time capsule. It had been waiting here in the dark, under its shroud, holding the thoughts and dreams of a person I was only just beginning to realize I never truly knew. My grandfather, or perhaps the woman from the photograph. The questions multiplied, swirling in the dusty air around me. Why was this room sealed? What was written in the letters and journals that were almost certainly tucked away inside its many compartments? The key to the desk itself was missing, the small ornate keyhole on the slanted lid a dark and mocking eye. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that its key would be here, somewhere in this room, or perhaps in another box, in another forgotten corner of this house. The next piece of the puzzle was waiting. The desk was not an ending, it was a beginning. It was an invitation, a challenge issued from across the decades, and as I stood there in the single dancing beam of light, I knew without a doubt that I was going to accept. The attic dust, disturbed for the first time in years, hung in the air like a visible form of memory. I sat on the floor of our half-empty living room, the brittle pages of my mother's past spread around me. The letters weren't a confession. They were a blueprint, a pattern, repeating itself over and over in faded blue ink. There was the handsome tennis coach from the club when she was newly married, the young professor who boarded with her parents, a married colleague of my father's. In each account, she painted herself as the reluctant object of a man's overwhelming affection, a woman whose charm was a burden she was forced to bear. But reading between the lines, the truth was there. The thrill was in the forbidden nature of it all. The attention had to be stolen to be worth anything. My father's ghost shifted in my mind. He wasn't the oblivious, good-natured man I had always pictured. He was the warden, the manager of my mother's compulsions, his quiet presence, his constant steady hand on her arm, his gentle way of redirecting conversations. It wasn't simple affection. It was a job, a lifelong thankless task of running interference, of keeping the performance contained. The weight of his silence suddenly felt immense, a burden he had carried so I wouldn't have to. And in his absence, the role of that buffer had fallen to the next available man, my husband. The quiet understanding settled not like a peace, but like a layer of cold, hard frost over everything. I wasn't crazy. I was the only one who hadn't been in on this secret. The collective pretending wasn't a recent phenomenon. It was the family's foundational rule. My sister Sarah hadn't been looking away out of awkwardness. She had been looking away out of practice. I stacked the letters neatly, my movements slow and deliberate. The frantic energy that had propelled me through the last few days, the packing, the crying, the endless loop of self-doubt, was gone. In its place was a stillness, a terrible hollow calm. I placed a thin bundle of paper on the coffee table, a small island in the sea of cardboard boxes. Evidence. Not that I needed to prove anything to anyone anymore. The proof was for me. It was the anchor that would stop the gaslighting current from ever dragging me under again. I was still sitting there when I heard Ryan's key in the lock. The sound, once a comfort, was now just a mechanical fact. The turning of a lock, the opening of a door. He stepped inside, his face a careful mask of concern. He saw the boxes, then me, then the letters on the table. "Laura, what's all this?" he asked, his voice soft, the voice he used when he thought I was being fragile. "I'm leaving, Ryan," I said. My own voice sounded foreign, detached, clear. He set his briefcase down, the sound echoing in the sparsely furnished room. "Okay, let's not be dramatic. We had a fight, a bad one, but this?" He gestured around the room at the visible dismantling of our life. "This is an overreaction." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "My entire life has been an underreaction." I gestured to the letters. "I found these in the attic, from my mother to her sister years ago." He walked over and looked down at the pile but didn't touch them. He was afraid to. And they explain everything," I said. "She's done this before, with other men. Inappropriate men. My dad spent his whole life managing it, keeping her in check. And now he's gone." I watched his face, searching for a flicker of recognition, a dawning horror, a simple, "Oh my God, Laura, you were right." I was a fool to look for it. What I saw was something else entirely. A subtle tightening around his eyes, the look of a man calculating his next move, searching for the path of least resistance. "Laura, they're old letters," he said, his tone placating, patronizing. "Your mom was probably just being theatrical. You know how she can be. You can't dismantle our marriage over some decades-old drama." The politeness of it was like a slap. The calm, rational tone that had always made me feel like the hysterical one. But it didn't work anymore. I saw it for what it was, a shield, a wall made of all the things he wasn't saying. "It's not decades-old drama, Ryan. It's right now. It was at my birthday dinner. It was at Christmas. It's been happening in our kitchen for months. This just proves it's not in my head." I finally looked at him, really looked at him. "You know it's not. You feel it too. I see it on your face every time she touches you. I see you pull away." He flinched. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but I saw it. He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was strained, but the politeness was still there. A stubborn, infuriating veneer. "Your mother is grieving. She's lonely. She's affectionate. Maybe she's a little too familiar sometimes, I'll grant you that, but it's harmless." Harmless, that was the word. The final betrayal. "It's not harmless to me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's cost me my family. It's costing me my marriage." "It doesn't have to," he pleaded, finally dropping the pretense of a calm and taking a step toward me. "Laura, please, just think about this. We can talk to her. Together, we can set a boundary. We don't have to blow up our lives. Think of what this will do to her. To your family." And there it was, his primary concern. Not the violation, not the lie, not my pain. The conflict, the potential for a scene, the discomfort of confrontation. He would rather I live with the wrongness forever than endure one difficult conversation. He was asking me to go back to pretending, to join the conspiracy. "I am thinking of what it will do," I said, standing up. My legs felt steadier than they had in months. "It will finally make things honest. And I can't have a conversation with her, Ryan, because it's not just about her. It's about you. You saw it, and you chose to look away. You chose to keep the peace instead of protecting me." He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He had nothing to say. For the first time, there was no polite phrase, no neutral territory for him to retreat to. I had stated the simple, undeniable truth. His silence was his confession. "I'm going to a hotel tonight," I said, picking up my purse. "My lawyer will be in touch." I walked past him, out the door of the home we had built together, and I didn't look back. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. It was charged with everything he had refused to say and everything I never needed to hear again. The next day, I called Sarah. I did it from the sterile quiet of the hotel room. The generic art on the wall, a strange backdrop for the final tearing of a family scene. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk. "Laura, where are you? Ryan called me. He's a mess." "I'm at a hotel," I said. "I left him." A heavy sigh on the other end of the line, the sound of impatience. "For God's sake, Laura, over a piece of cake? You're going to divorce the man because Mom was being silly at your birthday?" "It wasn't about the cake, Sarah. You know that." My voice was flat. I wasn't going to argue, I was going to inform. I found some of Mom's old letters, the ones she wrote to Aunt Carol in the 70s and 80s. There was a pause, a different kind of silence from her now, not impatient, wary. "Okay," she said, drawing the word out. "I know about her pattern," I said. "I know about the other men. I know that Dad spent his whole life running defense for her. I know why you all pretend not to see it." The silence stretched, thin and tight. I could picture her perfectly, standing in her pristine kitchen, one hand rubbing her forehead, her face pinched with annoyance that this secret was finally being spoken aloud. She was not horrified for me. She was angry that I had broken the rule. "You don't know anything," she finally said, her voice low and sharp. "You're being cruel. Dad did what he had to do to keep this family together, and Mom is complicated. You have no idea how hard it was for him. And now you're going to throw it all in her face because you're feeling insecure?" It was breathtaking, the speed with which she twisted it. Dad was a hero, Mom was a victim of her own complexity, and I was the villain. I was the one destroying the peace my father had worked so hard to maintain. "He shouldn't have had to do that, Sarah," I said, my heart aching for the father I now understood. "And I shouldn't have to do it either. Ryan shouldn't have to. It's wrong." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she snapped. "It's just how things are. You deal with it. You manage it. You don't blow up your life and break Mom's heart just to prove a point." "My only point," I said calmly, "is that I won't pretend anymore." "Fine," she spat. "Be the martyr. Wreck your marriage, isolate yourself. But don't come crying to me when you're all alone because you were too stubborn to just let things be." She hung up. I held the phone to my ear for a long moment, listening to the dead air. The silence had finally won. It had consumed my marriage, and now it had taken my sister. But as I lowered the phone, I realized something. I wasn't a ghost in my own family anymore. I had walked out of the haunted house. The silence wasn't my prison. It was just quiet. And in that quiet, for the first time in a very long time, I could hear myself think. I was alone, but I wasn't crazy. And that, I was beginning to understand, was everything. The letters were on the nightstand, a neat stack, bound by the faded pink ribbon my mother had used to tie them. They felt heavy, not just with the weight of the paper, but with the years of silence they represented. I had read them 3 times, the spidery cursive, a map of a life I never knew my mother had lived. A life of calculated flirtations, of manufactured drama, of a desperate need to be the most desired woman in any room. A life my father had spent his years quietly, exhaustedly managing. I was folding a sweater, placing it into a cardboard box, when Ryan appeared in the doorway of our bedroom. He didn't say my name. He just stood there, a ghost in the frame of a life we no longer shared. He was wearing the gray Henley I'd bought him for his last birthday, and for a second, the sheer domesticity of it all made my stomach clench. "Laura," he said, his voice low and cautious, the voice he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "Can we just talk for a minute?" I didn't stop folding, a pair of jeans, a soft t-shirt. My movements were methodical, a strange calm having settled over me. The frantic energy, the sick churning panic of the last few months had finally burned itself out. All that was left was this cold, clear certainty. There's nothing left to talk about, Ryan. That's not true. He took a step into the room, his hands shoved in his pockets. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the half-empty closet. "You're throwing away 15 years, over a misunderstanding." A bitter laugh almost escaped me, but I swallowed it. Hysteria was what they expected. I wouldn't give it to them. It was never a misunderstanding. The only mistake was me pretending along with the rest of you for so long. Pretending? Nobody was pretending. He finally looked at me, his face a mask of weary patience. It was the look that had broken me so many times, the one that said, "You are being difficult. You are the problem. Your mother is grieving. She's effusive, that's all. You're twisting it into something ugly." I carefully placed the last shirt in the box and reached for the packing tape. My hands were steady. I looked from his face to the letters on the nightstand. "My proof, my anchor. She wrote about it, you know," I said, my voice quiet. The quiet felt powerful now. It was my quiet, not theirs. She wrote about all of it, the thrill of it, the men she went after because they were forbidden. Her words, not mine. She wrote about how Dad had to smooth things over, how he spent his life running interference. I watched his face, waiting for the flicker of shock, of dawning horror, for the apology that would never come. Instead, a familiar shuttered look came over his features. He glanced at the letters, then quickly away, as if their very existence was an accusation. Laura, that was decades ago. People write things. They're dramatic. It doesn't mean anything. And there it was, the final, indestructible wall. The wall made of all the things he refused to see. He would look at concrete proof of the pathology I had been describing for a year, and he would call it drama. He would choose the comfortable lie every single time, because the truth was messy. The truth required a spine. "She isn't dramatic, Ryan," I said, pressing the tape down with a sharp, definitive rip. "She's unwell, and you've been her audience." He flinched. "That's not fair." "No," I said, turning to face him fully. I felt a strange pity for him then. He was so committed to his role as the peacekeeper that he couldn't see he was just a pawn, a prop in her sad private play. "What wasn't fair was you letting me think I was crazy. What wasn't fair was watching her touch you, watching her look at you, and then telling me I was imagining it. You chose her comfort over your wife's sanity, every single time." He had no answer. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, the way it always had at family dinners. But this time, I wasn't drowning in it. I was just observing it. He looked away first, of course. He always looked away. "My mother's a wreck," he mumbled, deflecting to the very end. "Sarah called. They're worried about you." "They're not worried about me," I said, picking up the box. It was heavy. "They're worried I'm going to stop playing the game." I walked past him out of the room. He didn't try to stop me. My phone buzzed an hour later. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters one last time. A final, absurd act of tidiness. The screen lit up with Sarah's name. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the ignore button. But I knew I had to answer. This too needed an ending. "What have you done, Laura?" she asked, her voice tight and brittle, skipping any greeting. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I'm leaving Ryan," I said simply. "I know that. Mom called me. She's hysterical. She thinks it's her fault." "Because it is," I thought. But I said, "It doesn't matter what she thinks." "Of course it matters," she snapped. "You can't just blow up your life, our family, like this. After everything we've been through with Dad." Her voice cracked, the practiced strategic deployment of grief. "Sarah, this has nothing to do with Dad. This started because of her." "Her?" Sarah's voice was laced with disbelief. "You mean Mom?" "Laura, for God's sake, she's a 65-year-old widow. She likes Ryan. He's been kind to her. Is that a crime now? You walked out of your own birthday dinner and humiliated everyone because she put a dot of frosting on his nose. Do you hear how insane that sounds?" There it was, the family script, the one they had all memorized. I was the hysterical one, the ungrateful one, the one who made things ugly. "I found her letters, Sarah," I said, my voice flat. "The ones from before she married Dad, the ones she kept in the cedar chest." There was a beat of pure, cold silence on the other end of the line. It was different from Ryan's silence. His was empty. This was full. It was the silence of someone who knew exactly what I was talking about. "We don't talk about those," she finally whispered. The words were ice. The breath caught in my throat. "You knew." It wasn't a question. You knew what she was like. It's not like that," she stammered, her composure finally cracking. "That was a long time ago. She was young. Dad handled it. It was handle." "Handle? Sarah, he spent his entire life handling it. And when he died, she just found someone new to perform for. She found Ryan. And you all just let it happen. You just looked the other way." "What was I supposed to do?" she cried, her voice rising to a desperate wail. "Make a scene? Accuse our mother of being... what? Flirtatious? It's just how she is. It's harmless. You ignore it and it goes away. That's how you keep a family together, Laura. You don't set off bombs just because you're feeling a little insecure." Harmless. That was the word. The word they all used to neuter the truth. The grief I felt in that moment was sharper than anything I'd felt for my marriage. It was the grief of realizing my sister was not a bystander in my gaslighting. She was a co-author. She had made a conscious choice, years ago, to trade truth for peace. She had looked at our mother's sickness and decided it was easier to pretend it was health My refusal to do the same was not a cry for help to her. It was a betrayal of the pact. "I have to go, Sarah," I said. The cold clarity was back. "Laura, wait. Just come over. We can talk to Mom together. We can smooth this over." "No," I said. "I'm done smoothing things over." I ended the call. I took the box of my clothes out to the car, then came back for the last one. A small box from my desk containing my journals, some important papers, and on top, the stack of my mother's letters. I stood in the doorway of the house for a moment. It was just a house, a collection of wood and drywall and memories that were no longer mine. For years, I had felt like a ghost in my own life, haunting the edges of conversations, an invisible witness to a truth no one would acknowledge. I put the box with the letters on the passenger seat, my only ally, the only voice that had, in its own twisted way, told me the truth. I started the car, the engine a low hum in the quiet afternoon. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look at the street where I had lived for 15 years. I just looked at the road ahead, a long empty stretch of pavement. The silence in the car wasn't the suffocating, watchful silence of my family. It was just quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt like peace. The silence was the first thing I reclaimed. For 2 years, silence had been a weapon used against me. It was the charged, watchful quiet at the dinner table. It was the heavy space in the car after leaving my parents' house. It was the wall Ryan built between us every night in bed, a wall made of all the things he wasn't saying. That silence was a presence, an invisible guest in my home that told me I was crazy, that I was wrong. But in my small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, the silence was mine. It was the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of a clock on the wall, the sound of my own breathing as I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by boxes I was in no hurry to unpack. This quiet wasn't an absence of noise, it was the presence of peace. A quiet that asked nothing of me and accused me of nothing. It was honest. I'm 41 now. The divorce from Ryan was finalized 6 months ago. It was an eerily polite process, which felt fitting. He was relieved. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed when we signed the final papers, as if a great, unspoken burden had been lifted. He was free now to never have the conversation. He could retreat fully into his world of polite neutrality, a world where nothing uncomfortable ever had to be acknowledged. I didn't hate him for it. I just grieved the man I thought I had married, the one I believed would stand with me. That man had never really existed. He was a projection of what I needed, not a reflection of who Ryan was, a peacekeeper. He had kept the peace, and it had cost him his wife. It had cost me my family. My mother I had not spoken to since the day I told her I was leaving Ryan. It was a short, sterile phone call. I didn't accuse her. I didn't mention the letters or the touches or the looks. What was the point? Her entire life was a testament to her inability to see herself. To try and make her see would be like trying to explain color to a person born blind. "I see," she'd said, her voice impossibly small and wounded. "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for, Laura." It was a masterful performance. In one sentence, she had painted me as the fickle one, the searcher, the one who was leaving a perfectly good life for some unknowable selfish reason. She was the victim, always the victim. I said goodbye and hung up. The true amputation, the one that ached like a phantom limb, was Sarah, my sister. We had shared a womb, a childhood, a language of inside jokes and shared glances. But she had chosen a side. She had chosen the silence. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I saw her name on the screen and a cold knot formed in my stomach, a ghost of the feeling I used to get every Sunday before dinner. I let it ring 4 times, then answered. My new silence had made me stronger. "Hello, Sarah." "Laura." "You answered." There was an odd mix of relief and accusation in her voice, as if my answering was both a welcome surprise and a long overdue obligation. "I saw you were calling," I said, my voice flat, neutral. I was borrowing a page from Ryan's book. There was a beat of quiet, the old familiar kind, the kind where someone is waiting for you to fill it. I didn't. I just waited. We were just thinking about you," she finally said, the "we" hanging in the air. "Mom's been worried sick." "Has she?" I said. It wasn't a question. "Laura, come on. This has gone on long enough. You've made your point." "This isn't about making a point, Sarah." "Then what is it about?" she snapped, her voice finally cracking with real emotion, annoyance. You blew up your life. You left your husband. You've cut your whole family off. For what? Because Mom was... What? Nice to Ryan? Because she was grieving and maybe leaned on him a little? It's sick. What you've decided happened. Sick. The word hit me, but it didn't pierce. It was just a word, a part of the script I now knew by heart, the family script. Laura is the difficult one. Laura is the dramatic one. Laura imagines things. I'm not going to argue with you, I said, looking out my window at the quiet street below. I know what I saw. What you think you saw, she corrected. Everyone else saw a grieving woman. You're the only one who decided it was something ugly. Because you all decided to look away, I said, the words coming out quieter than I expected. That was always the deal, wasn't it? Just look away. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, a shaky, frustrated sound. She was in the kitchen of our childhood home. I could picture it perfectly. She'd be leaning against the counter, one hand twisting the phone cord, looking at the floor, looking away. Mom met someone, she said, changing tactics. The non sequitur was a classic family move. When one topic becomes uncomfortable, simply introduce another, as if the first never existed. That's good, I said. He's a widower, from her church. He's very kind. He has a son, you know, about Ryan's age. A cold dread, slick and oily, moved through me. It was so predictable, it was almost boring. The pattern, laid bare in those old, brittle letters, was playing out again. A new stage, a new audience, a new unavailable man, unavailable by proxy this time, through his son, a new secret to create. She's lonely, Laura. Sarah's voice softened, becoming pleading. She lost Dad, and now she feels like she's lost you too. She just wants her family back. Whatever you think happened is over. Ryan is gone. Can't you just let it go? For me. For me. That was the final card. The appeal to the sisterhood she had abandoned. She was asking me to come back into the fold, to take my seat at the table and pretend. To ignore the fact that the rot was still there, just finding new wood to burrow into. She wasn't asking for reconciliation. She was asking for my complicity. And in that moment, I felt a profound wave of pity for her. She was trapped. She would spend the rest of her life turning away, changing the subject, managing my mother's needs, policing the silence. She would call it love. She would call it family. She would call it loyalty. But it was a prison, and she was holding the key to her own cell, refusing to use it. No, I said. It was just one word, but it felt like the heaviest thing I had ever lifted. It was the end of a lifetime of trying, the end of hoping she might one day see. No, she repeated, incredulous. No, Sarah, I can't. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't charged, it wasn't heavy, it was empty. The sound of a door closing for the last time. You were always so selfish, she whispered and hung up. I stood by the window for a long time, holding the silent phone. The phantom limb of my sister ached. I had lost her long before that phone call, but this was the burial. There was a grief in it, sharp and real. But beneath the grief, there was something else. The clean, hard feeling of a bone that has finally been set. I put the phone down. I looked around my quiet apartment at the boxes that held the pieces of my life. It was a smaller life now, stripped of the people and places I had once called home. There were no more Sunday dinners to dread. No more holidays filled with that suffocating, performative cheer. No more pretending. It was a life built not on a shared history I could no longer trust, but on the simple, radical act of believing myself. The quiet in my apartment wasn't empty. It was full of everything I had chosen. And for the first time in a very long time, it was enough. The cold air hit my face like a slap, sharp and real. Behind me, the muffled warmth of the restaurant, the clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation, the laughter was a world I had just stepped out of, a world I knew with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty I could never step back into. I stood on the pavement, the city lights blurring around the edges, my purse clutched in my hand like an anchor. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't be in there. I couldn't be in the room where my husband let my mother dab frosting on his nose like he was her pet, her prize. I couldn't be at the table where my sister studied the scuffs on her shoes with intense fascination, where my mother's new boyfriend chuckled as if it were all just a bit of harmless fun. Harmless, that was the word they would all use. I heard the restaurant door swing open behind me. I didn't have to turn around. I knew the sound of his shoes on the concrete, the hesitant, measured pace of a man who hated confrontation more than anything in the world. Laura. Ryan's voice was a low hiss, tight with embarrassment. What are you doing? Everyone's staring. I finally turned to look at him. His face was flushed, his expression a familiar mixture of frustration and pleading. He wasn't looking at me, not really. His eyes were darting back toward the restaurant window, worried about the audience. Always worried about the audience. I'm leaving, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. All the trembling was happening on the inside, a deep seismic shudder. Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. It's your birthday, he said, as if that explained everything, as if a date on the calendar could erase what had just happened. Come back inside. You're making a scene. No, I said, and the word was small but absolute. The scene was in there. I'm just the one who walked away from it. He finally met my eyes, and I saw the flicker of anger. The anger wasn't for my mother. It was for me, for breaking the unspoken rule, for refusing to pretend. It was frosting, Laura. A joke, he whispered, stepping closer. Your mom was just being playful. You know how she is. I do, I said, and that's the problem. And so do you. A car hissed by, its headlights sweeping across his face. For a second, he looked lost. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing and now saw only as a stalling tactic, a way to build a small wall of time between a question and the answer he didn't want to give. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice rising in pitch. Make a scene? Yell at your mother at your own birthday party? Is that what you want? I looked at him, at this man I had loved, this man I had built a life with, and I felt a profound and desolate sense of pity. He thought the options were either a screaming match or silent complicity. He couldn't imagine a third option, a quiet, firm boundary, a simple, Evelyn, don't do that. A hand gently but decisively stopping hers, a look that said, I am my wife's husband, not your plaything. But he was incapable of it. It wasn't in his vocabulary. His entire being was geared toward smoothness, toward the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance was to let my mother have her little thrill, and to let me absorb the cost. I wanted you to see it, I said, my voice cracking just once. That's all. I just wanted you to see it and not pretend you didn't. There was nothing to see, he insisted, his voice dropping again, conspiratorial. You're blowing this out of proportion. Sarah said you've been on edge all night. Convenient. Sarah, my sister, the professional witness to nothing, she would provide him the perfect alibi. Laura's just being sensitive. Laura's imagining things. They were a team. They had been a team for a long time, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. My husband, my sister, my mother, united in their campaign of silence. I need to go home, I said. It was a statement of fact. Fine, he snapped, his patience gone. He dug in his pocket for the keys. We'll go. We'll leave your party. We'll ruin the whole night. Is that what will make you happy? The silence had finally won. Not the quiet of the dinner table, but a new, heavier silence that filled the car on the drive home. It was the silence of an ending. The air was thick with all the things Ryan wasn't saying, all the apologies he would never give, because he didn't believe he had done anything wrong. He drove with his hands locked at 10 and 2, his jaw tight. He was angry that I had refused to play my part. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood slide by. They looked alien. The houses, the trees, the streetlights. It was like seeing a movie set of a life that was no longer mine. The wrongness that had been a faint hum in the background of my life for months had become a roar. It was all I could hear. When we pulled into the driveway, he killed the engine and the silence became absolute. For a full minute, we just sat there. Look, he said, his voice softer now. The anger had been replaced by a weary sort of condescension. The voice you use on a child who has had a tantrum and is finally exhausted. Let's just go inside, get some sleep. Things will look better in the morning. Things will look better in the morning. The official motto of the willfully blind. I realized then that he would never change. He would wake up tomorrow and pretend last night never happened. If I stayed, my life would be an endless series of these moments. A lingering touch in the kitchen that I was meant to ignore. A charged comment over dinner that I was meant to laugh off. And every time I objected, I would be the difficult one, the one ruining the mood, the one making things weird. My reality would be denied again and again until I finally gave up and joined them in their world of make-believe. Until I, too, learned how to look away. I got out of the car. Inside, the house was cold and quiet. Our home. It felt like a museum of a marriage. The photos on the mantelpiece, the books on the shelves, the throw blanket I'd bought, folded neatly over the arm of the sofa. They were artifacts from another time. Ryan followed me in, tossing the keys onto the small table by the door. The clatter was unnervingly loud. "I'm going to bed," he announced, already halfway up the stairs. He paused and looked down at me. "Are you coming?" I looked up at him, standing there in the dim light of the hallway. My polite, neutral husband, the peacekeeper. He was offering me one last chance to go back, to climb the stairs, get into our bed, and pretend. All I had to do was say yes. All I had to do was surrender. But the ghost in my own family was done, being invisible. "No," I said. He sighed, a long, suffering sound. "Laura, for God's sake." "I'm packing a bag, Ryan." The words hung in the air between us. He stared at me, his face blank with disbelief. He truly hadn't seen this coming. In his world, women like me didn't leave. They got over it. They adapted. They fell silent. "You're what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm packing a bag," I repeated, and this time my voice was as clear and as cold as the night air outside. "I can't stay here?" He didn't move. He just stood on the stairs, watching me as I turned my back on him and walked toward the guest room. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of my decision. It was the sound of a lock turning, a door closing for the last time. It was the sound of me finally choosing to believe myself. 2 years passed in a quiet blur. The silence from my family was a different kind now. It wasn't the tense, humming silence of a dinner table where everyone was pretending. It was the hollow, empty silence of a phone that never rang, an inbox that never held their names. At first, the quiet felt like a wound. Every holiday, every birthday was a fresh ache, a reminder of the amputation. I had cut them off to save myself, but the phantom limb still throbbed. I was 43. I had a small apartment that overlooked a park, a job I found satisfying, and a handful of friends who knew nothing of the before time. They knew me only as Laura, a woman who was reserved but steady, who preferred small gatherings to large ones, and who never ever spoke of her family. It was a peaceful existence, built on the foundations of what I had salvaged from the wreckage. I had learned to trust the quiet, to find comfort in it. Then the email arrived. It was from a name I didn't recognize, Chloe Martel. The subject line was Thanksgiving. My first instinct was to delete it. It felt like a trap, a lure from a world I had fought so hard to escape. But curiosity, that old, treacherous friend, made me click. "Hi, Laura. You don't know me, but my father is Arthur Martel. I believe you know him. He's been seeing your mother, Evelyn, for the past year and a half. Dad is so happy with her, and we're all so thrilled to finally have her joining our family for Thanksgiving this year. She mentioned that you live in this city, and we all thought it would be wonderful if you could join us as well. We're very informal, just a big, loud get-together at my house. Mom said to tell you she misses you. Dad says you're lovely. Hope to see you there. Best, Chloe." I read it 3 times. The words were so bright, so innocent. A big, loud get-together. The opposite of the suffocating quiet I remembered. Dad is so happy with her. My stomach tightened. Arthur was a kind man, a widower I'd met briefly before the end. He was gentle and unassuming. He deserved happiness. Mom said to tell you she misses you. That was the line that snagged me. Not, "I miss you," but she said to tell you. A message delivered through a stranger, a buffered, deniable sentiment. It was classic Evelyn, a performance of motherhood for a new audience. For a week I wrestled with it. Part of me, a small, hopeful, stupid part, wondered if things had changed. A year and a half with a good man, a new family to welcome her. Maybe the desperation, the frantic need for the wrong kind of attention had finally quieted. Maybe my absence had forced a reckoning. Hope is a stubborn weed. The other, larger part of me knew better. It remembered the letters. It remembered the cold knot in my stomach that had been my constant companion for years. It remembered the look on Ryan's face when he called me cruel. In the end, I decided to go. Not for her, not for them, for me. I needed to see it one last time, with clear eyes, free from the fog of my marriage and the desperate need for my family to be something it wasn't. I would not be a participant. I would be an anthropologist, observing a strange and familiar tribe in its natural habitat. I would go late and leave early, a ghost at the feast. Chloe's house was in a suburb 20 minutes outside the city. It was a lovely sprawling home, windows glowing with a warm yellow light. I could hear the sounds Chloe had promised, laughter, the clatter of plates, music, spilling out into the cold November air. For a moment, I almost turned back. The warmth felt like a lie. I took a breath and pushed the door open. The scene inside was exactly as advertised. A chaotic, happy mess of people. Kids chasing a dog through the living room. A cluster of men shouting at a football game on TV. Women moving in and out of a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey. And there she was, my mother. She was holding court near the fireplace, a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at something Arthur was saying. She looked wonderful. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her dress elegant. She looked happy. She looked normal. My heart gave a painful lurch. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was all in my head. Sarah was there too, sitting on a couch nearby, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up as I walked in, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, surprise, guilt, crossed her face before the mask of pleasant neutrality snapped back into place. She gave me a small, tight nod, then immediately turned her attention back to her screen. The silent treatment, perfected over a lifetime, was still her native tongue. My mother saw me then. Her smile didn't falter, but it changed. It became brittle, a performance. "Laura, darling, you came!" She glided toward me, arms outstretched. I stood my ground, offering not an embrace, but an impassable wall of stillness. Her arms dropped. "It's so good to see you," she said, her voice a little too loud. Arthur came to her side, his hand on her back. He looked genuinely pleased. "Laura, so glad you could make it," he said, his smile warm and real. "Evelyn's missed you terribly." My mother squeezed his arm, looking up at him with pure adoration. It was a masterful show. Then I saw him. He was standing by the kitchen doorway, holding a beer, talking to one of Arthur's sons. Ryan, my ex-husband. He hadn't seen me yet. A cold wave washed over me, so intense it felt like drowning. Of course he was here. Why wouldn't he be? He had never left the family. He had only left me. He was still their polite, neutral, peacekeeping son-in-law. He chose them. He was still choosing them. He looked up, and his eyes met mine across the crowded room. The friendly chatter on his face froze. For a second, just a second, I saw the ghost of the man I had married, a flicker of pain, of memory. Then it was gone. He gave me a small, strained smile, the kind of polite, meaningless smile you give a stranger in a waiting room. He turned back to his conversation. He looked away. It was the looking away that I could never forget. I felt invisible, a ghost in a room full of people who had conspired to erase me. I drifted toward the edge of the room, finding a spot near a bookshelf where I could watch, unseen. I watched my mother with Arthur. She was attentive, charming, playing the part of the devoted partner beautifully. I watched Sarah, who occasionally laughed at something someone said but never once looked in my direction. I watched Ryan, who carefully navigated the room to ensure he was never within 10 feet of me. It was a perfectly choreographed dance of denial. For an hour, nothing happened. The wrongness was dormant. The hope, that stubborn weed, began to sprout again. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the new normal. Peaceful, separate. And then Arthur's other son, a young man named Ben, who was maybe 25, came to say goodbye to his father and Evelyn. He was handsome, with the easy confidence of youth. "Great seeing you, Evelyn," he said, giving her a quick hug. "Have a good night, Dad." As he pulled away, my mother's hand lingered on his arm. "Oh, you're leaving so soon?" she said, her voice dropping into a lower, more intimate register. It was a sound I knew like the back of my own hand. "Yeah, have to get up early tomorrow," he said, oblivious. "Well, it was just wonderful to meet you properly," she said. Her thumb stroked the fabric of his sleeve, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch too close, her world shrinking to include only him. "Arthur talks about you all the time. I feel like I know you already." Her smile was dazzling. It was meant only for him. The air around them became charged, thick with an energy that had no place here, between a woman and her new boyfriend's son. It was happening again. I instinctively looked for the others, for my co-conspirators in the silence. Arthur was beaming, deaf and blind to the undercurrent, seeing only his lovely girlfriend being charming to his son. But Sarah saw it. I watched her glance over, her eyes catching the gesture, the lingering hand, the intense focus. I saw the briefest tightening around her mouth. And then, with practiced ease, she turned to the woman next to her and asked a loud, bright question about her children. She just turned away. And Ryan, he saw it too. His conversation faltered. He looked at my mother, then at the boy, and a shadow of deep discomfort crossed his face. It was the same look he'd had at my birthday dinner. The look of a man who knows something is deeply wrong but has already made the decision to do nothing. He cleared his throat, took a long swallow of his beer, and looked away. Back to the football game on the television, safe, neutral, polite. The silence had won again. It always would. Nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change. This family wasn't broken. It was a perfectly functioning machine, designed for one purpose, to enable my mother's pathology by pretending it didn't exist. Ryan wasn't my ex-husband. He was just another gear in the machine. Sarah wasn't my sister. She was the chief engineer of the silence. I didn't say goodbye. No one noticed me leave. I slipped out the front door, back into the cold, clean air. As I walked to my car, the sounds of laughter and warmth faded behind me. They weren't my family. I was not a missing piece from their puzzle. I was just gone. And for the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel like a wound. It felt like freedom. The dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the attic's bare bulb. I didn't move, I just read. The brittle, yellowed paper felt like shed skin in my hands. Each letter was a small, neat story of conquest and quiet desperation. A testament to a woman who fed on the one thing she could never truly have, the undivided attention of a man who belonged to someone else. It wasn't just the words. It was the handwriting, my mother's familiar, elegant script, the same script from my birthday cards and recipe notes, describing a secret, thrilling wrongness, a stolen glance from a married colleague, a lingering conversation with her best friend's husband, a flirtation with a young pastor, new to the church and full of earnest faith. The pattern was undeniable, stretching back decades. She didn't want the men. She wanted the game. She wanted the secret, the charged energy of the forbidden. She wanted to be the ghost in someone else's marriage, a beautiful, haunting problem. My own problem, I realized, was that I was the only one who hadn't been conditioned to look away. Sarah had grown up with it, learning to tune it out like background noise. My father, the rock, the anchor, had he known? Had he been the safe harbor she returned to after her silent, emotional voyages? Maybe his quiet strength wasn't just a personality trait. Maybe it was a coping mechanism. A wall built of all the things he chose not to see. And Ryan. He hadn't grown up with it, but he was a natural. His aversion to conflict was the perfect soil for my mother's games to grow in. He was polite, neutral, calm. He was unavailable, but not in a way that would cause a scene. He was the perfect target. A cold, heavy thing settled in my stomach. Something heavier than a knot. It was certainty. It was the grim, quiet relief of finally understanding the shape of the monster that had been living in my house. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't jealous or insecure or dramatic. I was just the one who had refused to pretend the monster wasn't there. I carefully placed the letters back into the shoebox one by one. The timeline of my mother's secret life. I closed the lid, the soft scrape of cardboard on cardboard echoing in the silent attic. I didn't push the box back into the corner. I carried it with me, down the rickety pull-down stairs, the wood groaning under my weight. Downstairs, the house felt different. The air, which had always felt thick with unspoken tension, now just felt thin and empty. The photographs on the mantelpiece, our wedding, family Christmases, smiling faces frozen in a lie of happiness, looked like props from a play I was no longer in. I walked into the kitchen and set the box on the gleaming granite countertop. The overhead light felt too bright, surgical. It exposed every surface, every illusion. I waited. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just stood there, my hand resting on the cardboard box, and waited for my husband to come home. An hour later, I heard his keys in the lock. The familiar sound, the one that used to mean safety and comfort, now sounded like a key turning in my own cell. "Hey, I'm home," he called out, his voice echoing from the entryway. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie. "Smells like nothing." Decided on takeout. He smiled, a tired end-of-day smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he saw me. He saw the look on my face, the stillness of my posture. He saw the box on the counter, his smile faltered. "Laura, what's wrong?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to really look at me, to look at this scene. For once, I was in control of the quiet. "I was in the attic," I said. My voice was level, devoid of the pleading, questioning tone it usually had when I tried to talk to him about this. "I found something." He sighed, that long-suffering sound he made when he thought I was being difficult. "Laura, if this is about your birthday again, I already said I was sorry." "It's not about my birthday," I said, cutting him off. I slid the box toward him. "It's about this." He looked at the innocuous shoebox as if it were a bomb. He didn't touch it. "What is this?" "Letters," I said, "from my mother to her sister, written over the last 30 years. His eyes slid away from the box. It was the looking away that I always came back to. He looked at the wall, the floor, the doorway, anywhere but at the proof in my hands. "Okay, so? Your mom's old letters. What does that have to do with anything?" "They're about men," I said, my voice still unnervingly calm. "Married men, unavailable men, men she liked to charm, just to see if she could, just for the thrill of it." He was silent now. The deflective, easygoing mask was gone. In its place was a guarded stillness. He knew where this was going. He had always known. "Ryan," I said, and his eyes finally reluctantly met mine. "She's a predator, a quiet one, a polite one. But that's what she is. And you are her current project." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "That is a horrible thing to say about your mother." "It's the truth," I said, "and you know it. You've always known it. You just didn't want to deal with it." I lifted the lid of the box. "Read them. Read just one. The one from 1998 about her boss, or the one from 2005 about the man who lived next door to them. It's all here, the same playbook. The lingering touches, the intense focus, the little games, it's all there, in her own words." I pushed the open box closer to him. The stack of letters, bound in their faded ribbons, sat there between us. An invitation to the truth. He stared at them. His face was pale. I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, a morbid curiosity, maybe even a sliver of validation for all the uncomfortable moments he'd pretended didn't happen. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, smothered by his defining trait, his desperate pathological need for peace at any price. He slowly, deliberately, put his hands in his pockets. He shook his head. "No," he said. His voice was low. "No? I'm not reading them," he said, taking a step back from the counter, away from the box, away from me. "This is her private stuff, Laura. It's wrong. And it doesn't matter." "It doesn't matter?" The calm I had cultivated finally cracked. A tremor ran through me. "It doesn't matter that my mother has been systematically undermining our marriage? That she has been treating you like her personal conquest in our own home? It doesn't matter that you have let her? She's your mother," he shot back, his voice rising. "She's a lonely widow. Maybe she's a little needy. What am I supposed to do, be rude to her? 'Cause a huge family drama, for what? For a hand on my arm? For some frosting on my nose? You're blowing this into something it's not." "It was never about being rude, Ryan," I said, my voice dropping again, weighted with the finality of it all. "It was about having my back. It was about drawing a line. It was about choosing me. And you never did. You never would." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion, like a man who couldn't understand why the ground was suddenly gone from beneath his feet. "So what do you want me to do, Laura? Huh? You want me to confront her? Ban her from the house? You want to destroy your family over this?" I looked at him, at this man I had loved, this man I had built a life with, and I saw him for what he was, not a peacekeeper, but a collaborator, a willing participant in the silence. My family wasn't something he could destroy. It was already broken. It had been for years. "No," I said softly. I placed the lid back on the shoebox. "I don't want you to do anything." I picked up the box and walked past him out of the kitchen. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, and placed the box on the bed. Then I pulled a suitcase from the top of the closet. The sound of the zipper was loud, obscene in the quiet house. He appeared in the doorway a moment later. "What are you doing?" "I'm done," I said, not looking at him. I opened a drawer and began taking out clothes, folding them with a strange, detached precision. I'm done pretending. I'm done being the crazy one. I'm done living in a house where my husband and my mother have a secret, and the secret is me. "Laura, stop. This is insane." He took a step into the room. "You're going to leave your marriage over some old letters and a feeling?" I finally stopped and looked at him. It was never just a feeling. It was a fact. Those letters just proved it. And I'm not leaving my marriage over them. Our marriage ended a long time ago. It ended every time you told me I was imagining things. It ended every time you chose her comfort over my pain. It ended every time you looked away. He had no answer for that. The silence had finally won. But it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't full of things unsaid. It was empty. It was the hollow sound of an ending. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching me pack. He didn't try to stop me again. He just watched, a ghost in his own home. And I realized with a clarity that felt like a shard of ice in my heart that he was relieved. I was taking the conflict with me. Soon the house would be quiet again. The peace would be restored. He had gotten what he always wanted.